You don't spend 20 years as a private investigator without seeing some strange things. Runaway teens turning up in cults, missing spouses hiding with new lovers, corporate execs running off with briefcases of cash. It's never glamorous, but it always makes sense eventually. At least it used to. Then came the case that led me to the forests of Wood County, Ohio. The parents of Jamie Fields, a college sophomore, hired me after she vanished on a hike in Harrison Woods. The police had closed the case quickly, dismissing it as a probable animal attack or a simple misstep that left her lost in the dense forest. Her boyfriend, Mark, had survived the incident, but his account was so bizarre the authorities ignored it completely. Something grabbed her, he'd told reporters, his eyes hollow and bloodshot. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It had these glowing eyes. The video of his interview had gone viral in local circles, earning him ridicule as a grieving lunatic. That's why Jamie's parents turned to me. They weren't ready to accept the police's version of events, and frankly, neither was I. Missing hikers are one thing, but the details surrounding Jamie's disappearance didn't add up. Mark's story might have sounded insane, but I've learned over the years that truth is often stranger than fiction. I packed my bag, loaded my revolver, and headed to Wood County to find out what really happened in those woods. Harrison Woods was nothing like the rolling farmland that surrounded it. The air seemed heavier as soon as I stepped beneath the canopy, the trees towering and ancient, their gnarled branches forming a labyrinth of shadow and green. It didn't take long to understand why so many people got lost out here. Trails twisted and split unpredictably, with no markings to guide hikers. I followed the route described in the police report, which Mark had said was the last path he and Jamie had taken together. My initial search turned up nothing unusual, just the typical signs of the wilderness. Fallen branches, animal tracks, the occasional rustle of leaves that might have been a bird or a squirrel. But as the day wore on, I began to notice the stillness. There were no birds singing, no insects buzzing, no sounds at all except for the crunch of my boots on the ground. It was as though the forest was holding its breath. Then I found the tree. It was an oak, its bark scarred with long, deep gashes that couldn't have been made by any animal native to Ohio. The gouges were spaced apart like the fingers of a massive hand, and sap oozed from them as though they were fresh. A few feet away, I spotted something else, a footprint in the soft soil. It was reptilian three-toed, with claw marks that dug deep into the earth, and far too large to belong to any living creature I'd ever heard of. My stomach tightened, but I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe it was an old track distorted by rain. But a whisper of unease had already taken root in my mind, and it was growing stronger with every step I took. By the time the sun began to set, I hadn't found any trace of Jamie, but the sense of being watched had grown unbearable. Every now and then I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of shadow that disappeared the moment I turned my head. My flashlight cast long, wavering beams of light as I scanned the trees, but the darkness seemed to swallow them whole. That's when I heard the whispering. At first, it was so faint I thought it was just the wind slipping through the branches. But as I stood still, straining to listen, the sound became clearer. It wasn't one voice, but many, overlapping and murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I gripped the handle of my revolver tightly, though I had no idea what I'd be shooting at. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. The whispers stopped immediately, plunging the forest into an even deeper silence. Then I saw them, two glowing yellow eyes staring at me from the shadows. They were too high off the ground to belong to a deer or a coyote, and they didn't blink. For a moment we just stared at each other, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Then the eyes disappeared, and the forest came alive with the sound of something crashing through the underbrush. I didn't chase after it. Instead, I turned and headed back to my car as fast as I could, the feeling of those eyes burning into the back of my skull the whole way. Back at my motel, I began digging into the history of Harrison Woods, hoping to find some explanation for what I'd seen. What I found only deepened the mystery. The legend of the lizard demon, or the Sissetuk, as it was known in local indigenous folklore, dated back centuries. The indigenous tribes in the area believed the creature was a guardian of the land, punishing those who trespassed or disrespected the forest. Early settlers told similar stories of a reptilian figure that stalked the woods, its glowing eyes visible even in the darkest nights. Livestock mutilations and missing persons were often attributed to the creature, though no one had ever captured it on film or in a sketch that survived. The most chilling account I found came from the 1970s, when a farmer claimed to have shot at the creature after finding it in his barn. According to his testimony, the bullet passed straight through it, leaving no blood, just a sulphurous stench and claw marks on the wooden beams. Other reports described strange symbols carved into trees or circles of dead vegetation that appeared overnight. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just a wild animal. It was something older, something tied to the very fabric of the land. And now, it seemed, it had reawakened. The next day, I returned to the woods, determined to gather more evidence, armed with a camera, a notebook, and the revolver that felt increasingly useless. I retraced my steps to the area where I'd seen the eyes. This time, I found something new. A circle of claw marks surrounded the spot where I'd stood the night before, each gouge deep and precise. Inside the circle, the ground was scorched black, as though it had been burned. I snapped photos, though my camera flickered and malfunctioned, the images distorting as if something didn't want to be captured. The stench of sulphur hung heavy in the air, making me gag. As I crouched to examine the marks more closely, I heard the whispers again. They were louder this time, more insistent, and they seemed to come from every direction. I spun around, flashlights sweeping the trees, but there was nothing there. Then the ground beneath my feet trembled, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. When I looked down, I saw the ground cracking, tiny fissures spreading out like spider webs. My pulse thundered in my ears as the whispers crescendoed, and for a moment I thought I saw movement in the darkness, a long, sinuous shape slithering between the trees. Then everything went silent, and the presence vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The whispers stayed with me long after I left the circle of claw marks. They didn't stop at the forest's edge. They followed me back to my car, echoing faintly in my mind like the memory of a bad dream. I drove aimlessly for hours, too shaken to return to my motel. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see those glowing eyes staring back at me. By the time I finally pulled into the motel parking lot, the sun had set, and the oppressive weight of the day's events settled squarely on my shoulders. I locked the door to my room and sat at the desk, poring over the notes I'd taken in the woods. The patterns of the claw marks, the scorched earth, the strange whispers, they felt deliberate, like a warning or a message. But from what? Or whom? As I scribbled down my thoughts, I heard a faint tapping at the window. My heart stopped. Slowly, I turned to look, but there was nothing there, just the darkness pressing against the glass. I told myself it was a tree branch or a bird. I tried to ignore it, but the tapping grew louder, more insistent. When I finally worked up the nerve to approach the window, flashlight in hand, I froze. Two glowing yellow eyes stared at me through the glass, unblinking and impossibly close. The face they belonged to was reptilian, covered in black scales that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Its mouth was a jagged line of sharp teeth, and its breath fogged the window with each exhale. For a moment I was paralyzed, trapped in its gaze. Then it let out a low guttural growl that shook the glass. I stumbled back, fumbling for my revolver, but by the time I turned back to the window, the creature was gone. The parking lot was empty, silent except for the hum of a distant street lamp. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the bed, gun in hand, jumping at every sound. Sleep didn't come, and when morning finally arrived, I was already packed and ready to leave. I should have left Wood County right then and there. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out, to abandon the case, to put as much distance as possible between myself and Harrison Woods. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, that I was being drawn back to the forest for a reason. Against my better judgment, I decided to meet with a local historian I'd heard about in town, a woman named Abigail Green who specialized in the folklore of the region. Abigail lived in a small, cluttered house on the edge of town, surrounded by stacks of books and faded maps. She greeted me cautiously, her sharp eyes scanning me like she could sense the fear clinging to me. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she said without preamble. I didn't need to ask what she meant. Abigail explained that the lizard demon, or Sissituck, as it was originally called, wasn't just a creature, it was a spirit, a guardian tied to the land itself. According to legend, the Sissituck would emerge whenever the balance of the forest was threatened, targeting those who disrespected the natural order. "It doesn't just kill," Abigail said, her voice low. "It marks you. Once you've been chosen, it doesn't stop until it gets what it wants." I asked her what it wanted, but she only shook her head. "That depends on you." Before I left, she handed me a small bundle of herbs tied with a red string, a protection charm, she said. It won't stop it, she warned, but it might give you a chance to run. Armed with the charm and a growing sense of dread, I returned to Harrison Woods for what I promised myself would be the final time. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to find them anywhere else. The forest was darker than I remembered, the canopy thicker and the shadows deeper. It felt like the woods had changed in my absence, as though they had been waiting for me. I retraced my steps to the area with the claw marks and the scorched earth, but the scene was different now. The claw marks had multiplied, carving jagged lines into every tree in a widening radius. The air was heavy with the stench of sulfur, and the ground beneath my feet felt unstable, like it might give way at any moment. As I stood there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, the whispers returned. This time they were louder, more coherent. They formed words, my name, repeated over and over in a voice that was both human and inhuman. I spun around, searching for the source, but the forest was empty. Then the ground shook, and I heard a sound that chilled me to my core. The slithering of something massive moving through the underbrush. The lizard demon emerged from the shadows like a nightmare made flesh. It was larger than I remembered, its black scales gleaming in the dim light, its eyes burning like twin suns. Its movements were unnaturally smooth, its body rippling as it circled me. I held up the charm Abigail had given me, clutching it like a lifeline. The creature paused, tilting its head as though it were studying me. Then it let out a roar that shattered the silence, and the charm burst into flames in my hand. I don't know how I escaped the woods that day. My memory of the event is fragmented, flashes of fear and adrenaline stitched together like a nightmare. I remember running, branches tearing at my clothes, the creature's growl echoing behind me. I remember falling, the taste of blood in my mouth and the sensation of something cold brushing against my skin. When I finally stumbled out of the forest, the world felt unreal, like I'd crossed into a different reality. The whispers were gone, but the weight of the encounter remained. Back at my motel, I examined the burns on my hand where the charm had been. The marks formed a patterned 3 jagged lines like claw marks seared into my skin. The historian's words echoed in my mind. Once you've been chosen, it doesn't stop until it gets what it wants. I left Wood County the next morning, but the lizard demon hasn't left me. The whispers have returned, faint but persistent, and the feeling of being watched is stronger than ever. At night I see its eyes in the darkness, glowing yellow and unblinking. I've tried to move on, to bury myself in other cases, but the mark it left on me is a constant reminder. Whatever the sissy tuck is, it's not finished with me.